right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. We're going to get into some really interesting F1 rule changes coming up in 2025.
Yeah, 2026 is getting all the attention with the engine regulations.
Right.
But don't sleep on 2025. There's some really interesting tweaks.
Oh, absolutely. It's kind of like a little sneak peek into how F1 is evolving. You know, they're reacting to all sorts of things, what the drivers are saying, crazy things that happen in races, and even those engineers finding clever loopholes.
Yeah, for sure, these changes really highlight what the sport thinks is important. And, they're always trying to strike that balance between competition and safety and, of course, making sure it's entertaining.
Right, well, let's just jump right into it then. Let's start with something that seems pretty small, but it has caused some debate. Getting rid of the fastest lap point.
Yeah, that was a rule that gave an extra point to whoever set the fastest lap during the race. They brought it back in 2019 thinking it would add some spice towards the end,
Right.
but it didn't always work out that way.
Yeah, I remember a lot of times it felt like almost an afterthought. You know, the leader would just crew to that extra point. No real challenge.
Exactly. And the last straw, I guess you could say, was Daniel Ricciardo in Singapore last year.
Oh, yeah.
His fastest lap might have actually messed with the championship a little bit. Some people thought it kind of spoiled things.
Right.
And it really showed how this rule could have some weird side effects they didn't expect.
Yeah. So it begs the question, will races be less exciting without that battle for the fastest lap? Or will it actually make the race strategies and the fights for position even more interesting? I guess we'll see.
It'll be interesting to see how the teams adjust their strategies now.
For sure.
So let's change gears a bit and talk about weight,
Okay.
both for the cars and the drivers. F1 cars have been getting heavier and heavier over the years. Bigger engines, hybrid systems, all that safety stuff.
Right.
And in 2025, the minimum weight is going up again to 800 kilograms.
Whoa, 800 kilograms.
That's pretty hefty.
Yeah. But this isn't really about the cars themselves, is it?
You got it. It's more about the drivers.
Oh, okay.
There's always been a slight disadvantage for drivers who are heavier.
Oh, interesting. I never thought of that.
Yeah, so they introduced a minimum driver weight a while back, 80 kilos. If a driver was lighter, the team had to add weights to the car to make up for it.
Okay.
Well, for 2025, they're bumping that minimum driver weight up to 82 kilograms.
So they're evening the playing field a bit.
Exactly. Recognizing that a driver's weight does play a role in how well they perform. All these little things add up. Did you ever consider that before?
Not really, no. And speaking of things that can really impact performance, we got to talk about extreme heat. Remember Qatar in 2023?
Oh, yeah.
It was scorching. You could see those drivers were really struggling.
Yeah, it was brutal.
I mean, it's tough enough to concentrate when you're strapped into a race car going that fast, let alone when you're battling heat exhaustion on top of it. What's F1 doing about that?
Well, because of those crazy hot races, the FIA decided they need a new cooling system.
Okay.
Starting in 2025, it's actually a pretty cool solution, no pun intended.
All right, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this cooling system.
So basically, it's a cooling vest, runs on batteries, built right into the driver's suit.
Oh, wow.
It's supposed to keep their core body temperature down when the temperature gets to 30.5 degrees Celsius or higher.
A cooling vest, huh? That's pretty high tech. Will drivers wear this in every race?
The rules say it's mandatory only when the FIA decides it's a heat hazard based on the temperature.
Right.
They actually partnered up with Chill Out Motorsports to develop this system. They've got experience in Formula E and NASCAR.
Chill Out Motorsports. Love the name. So paint me a picture here. What does this thing actually look like?
Picture a special shirt with, get this, almost 50 meters of coolant pipes woven into it, around the driver's chest and back.
Wow.
Coolant flows through those pipes, absorbing all that extra heat and keeping the driver at a safe temperature.
50 meters of cooling pipes. That's incredible. But I bet all that extra equipment adds some weight to the car, right?
You're right. The minimum car weight will go up by 5 kilograms for races where they have to wear the vest, and they even need extra scoops on the nose of the car to get more airflow and help regulate the system temperature. It's a pretty complex system.
It really is amazing all the engineering and thought that goes into these cars. It's great to see that F1 is really making driver safety and comfort a priority.
Yeah, it definitely shows how the sport is adapting to these tougher conditions.
So let's switch gears again. Let's talk about something that always gets fans excited. Flexi wings.
Oh, yeah.
Specifically, McLaren's Mini DRS rear wing design from last year.
Ah, yes, that was a clever bit of engineering.
It was brilliant.
They designed it to flex at high speed, which opened up a gap, reduced drag, and gave them a boost on the straights.
It was really smart. But of course, it also sparked a lot of debate about whether it was fair and if it was pushing the limits of the rules a bit too far.
Yeah, that's right. And as a result, the rules around flexible wings are getting a lot stricter for 2025, especially for the rear wing.
So no more bending the rules, literally. What are some of the key changes?
Well, first off, the size of that gap they were exploiting is being reduced, which limits how much the wing can flex. Also, the DRS, that flap on the rear wing, now has to be either fully open or fully closed. No more of that in-between flexible stuff.
Right.
And the transition time between open and closed has to be super fast, less than 400 milliseconds.
So imagine you're bending a ruler and it snaps right back into place.
Exactly. That's what the FIA is trying to stop with these new rules.
Makes sense.
And it's not just the rear wing they're keeping an eye on. They're also making the front wings stiffer, starting from the Spanish Grand Prix onwards. They're worried some teams might be taking that aeroelasticity thing a bit too far.
It makes you wonder, will these changes actually level the playing field, or will some teams still find those sneaky ways to get an edge?
That's the big question. We'll have to wait and see how the teams adapt their designs and how these rules play out on track.
Yeah, it's all part of that constant game between the engineers and the rule makers. Speaking of testing, it seems F1 is tightening the reins there too for 2025.
That's right. They're worried about teams doing too much testing with older cars, which could give them an unfair advantage. So starting in 2025, there's a limit of 20 days per season for testing with those older cars.
That makes sense. But what about the young drivers coming up? Do they get any track time with these new limits?
Oh, for sure. And this is where things get interesting. Remember how teams had to put a rookie driver in 2 practice sessions last year? Well, in 2025, that's being doubled. 4 mandatory rookie practice sessions.
Wow, that's awesome. That's a huge opportunity for these young drivers to get some real experience in an F1 car.
It is. It's a big step towards developing the next generation of F1 stars.
Definitely. Now, I want to talk about something that caused some real confusion last year. Grid formations. Remember the mess in Brazil when qualify got rained out?
Oh, yeah.
It exposed a gap in the rules, and no one really knew how to set the starting grid, especially with it being a sprint weekend.
Yeah, it was a logistical nightmare.
It seemed like everyone had a different interpretation of the rules, which is never good when you're trying to have a fair and competitive race.
Yeah, for sure.
The old regulations were a bit vague.
For 2025, they've fixed that. There's a clear rule now. If qualifying can't happen for whatever reason, the starting grid is based on the current driver championship standings.
Oh, so no more guesswork. Simple and fair solution. I like it.
They also clarified another rule that came up in Brazil. The final starting grid is set 1 hour before the race, and if any cars are pulled out after that, they won't be replaced.
So they're really trying to cover all the bases and get rid of any loopholes that could cause problems.
Yep, it's all about making things fair and making sure the races are decided on the track based on skill and strategy, not by finding loopholes in the rules.
For sure. Well, that's all the time we have for part 1 of this deep dive into the 2025 F1 rule changes. Don't worry, though, we'll be back with part 2, where we'll go even deeper into what these changes might mean for the sport and how they could shake things up.
You know, it's amazing to see how Formula One is constantly changing, adapting to these new challenges. These 2025 rule changes are a perfect example.
Yeah, totally. It's like they're playing chess, you know?
Exactly.
Always trying to think one step ahead.
And speaking of thinking ahead, those flexi wings we talked about, that's a great example of teams trying to find creative ways to gain an advantage.
McLaren's mini DRS was ingenious, no doubt about it.
It really was.
But I can see why the FIA stepped in to tighten those rules.
Right. It's a tough job for the rule makers.
Yeah.
Trying to encourage those clever ideas while keeping things fair for everyone.
It makes you wonder what they'll come up with next. Those F1 engineers are so smart.
They are always pushing the boundaries.
Always looking for that edge. But at the end of the day, it's the drivers who have to make those cars perform.
That's right.
Which brings us back to that new cooling vest.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the technical stuff, but we can't forget there's a human being in that car.
Absolutely.
Pushing their limits, physically and mentally.
Especially in that extreme heat we saw in Qatar, that cooling vest could be a game changer.
It could.
I wonder how it'll affect things.
Yeah.
Will we see fewer pit stops? Will certain teams have an advantage on certain tracks or in certain weather?
Those are great questions. We'll have to wait and see how it all plays out, but it's definitely something to watch.
For sure. Now let's talk about another change that could really shake things up. The rookie practice sessions.
Yeah. Doubling the number of mandatory outings for young drivers, that's a big deal.
It is. F1 is really showing they're serious about developing new talent.
Absolutely.
It's a huge opportunity for these young drivers to get some experience, but there's also a lot of pressure.
Yeah, imagine being a young driver, getting that call to drive an F1 car, millions of people watching.
Must be overwhelming.
The adrenaline, the expectations.
A real trial by fire, but also a chance to prove yourself.
And for us fans, it's a chance to see the future of F1. Maybe the next Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen.
Exactly. That's what's so exciting about it. Speaking of the future, we can't ignore the big changes coming in 2026 with the new engine regulations.
Right, that's going to be massive. More sustainable fuels, more electrical power, simpler designs. It's a whole new ball game.
Teams are going to have to completely rethink how they design their cars and their race strategies.
Definitely. And it'll be interesting to see who adapts the best.
It's a new era for Formula One, but for now, let's bring it back to 2025 and those rule changes we've been discussing.
Okay.
We've covered a lot. Getting rid of the fastest lap point, those cooling vests, clamping down on flexi wings, more opportunities for rookies, and those clearer grid formation rules.
A lot to digest.
It is, but it all points to a season that's going to be unpredictable and exciting.
Absolutely, and it's going to shape the future of the sport.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the 2025 F1 rule changes, I'm curious what stands out to you.
It's a lot to process, isn't it? We've got the farewell to the fastest lap point, the quest for driver comfort with those high-tech cooling vests, and the clampdown on creative engineering with the flexi-wing restrictions.
And let's not forget those expanded rookie practice sessions, a potential breeding ground for future F1 stars, plus the FIA's efforts to eliminate any ambiguity around grid formations.
What's fascinating to me is how these changes reflect a broader trend in Formula One, this constant push and pull between innovation and regulation.
You're right, it's like a high-speed dance between the brilliant minds of the engineers, always pushing the boundaries, and the rule makers trying to ensure fairness and safety.
And ultimately, it's the fans who benefit from this dynamic interplay. We get to witness incredible feats of engineering, breathtaking displays of driving skill, and nail-biting races that keep us on the edge of our seats.
Exactly, and these 2025 rule changes are just another chapter in this ongoing saga. It's going to be fascinating to see how they play out on the track, who will adapt quickly, who will struggle, and what unexpected twists and turns will emerge.
One thing's for sure, Formula One is never boring. It's a sport that constantly evolves, surprises, and challenges us.
So as we head into the 2025 season with all its new regulations and potential shakeups, I want to leave you with this thought.
How do you think these changes will reshape the competitive landscape? Who will be the winners and losers, and what hidden gems of innovation will emerge from the minds of F1's engineering masterminds?
Keep those questions in mind as you watch the races unfold. Because one thing is certain, the 2025 F1 season is going to be one for the history books.